Hey there, welcome to episode 2 of sourdough bread making, where we will blend our soaked grains into sourdough starter. This is a pretty quick and easy process, but before we get started, my dog is jumping on me because it's almost dinner time. Before we get started, I wanted to share a couple of things. One is that there is flexibility in this process, and you'll see this with sprouting too, as I'm sure I'll do some sprouting videos eventually. There is flexibility with the timing. I said you need to soak it for 8 to 12 hours, and I actually ended up soaking mine for quite a bit longer than that, and my kitchen is pretty cool, so that was fine. If it were warmer, I would definitely say get it in the fridge after 8 hours, and then if you want to leave it there for even 2-3 more days until you're ready, that's totally fine. So that's one thing. And then I also was asked if different grains can be used in this recipe. And the answer is yes. I often do this recipe with only buckwheat, and I have tried it also with buckwheat and quinoa, so I know both of those work. And I would imagine that just about any whole grain would work. There will be variation in taste and texture depending on the grain because all the grains are different, but that's sort of half the fun of it. So if you try something different, I'd love to hear about it, so please share your explorations in the comments. I would recommend starting with a base of buckwheat, so at least half buckwheat to start until you get to know the recipe, and then you can kind of get creative from there. So let's get started. So the first thing, I've got my soaking grains, 1/2 cup millet and 1/2 cup buckwheat, and I have spring water. This is about 3/4 of a cup. And I've got a jar that I'm going to use to store my sourdough starter. It's just a clean jar from something I bought at some point. And then I have my blender back here behind me. And I have my trusty rubber spatula. So it's a kitchen tool I cannot live without. And you'll notice that I have these ear protectors, which looks a little weird, but I will say the Vitamix is really loud. And you don't want to damage your ears. I'm certain that it can. I love my Vitamix, so no offense to Vitamix, but I stick my head right in there, and so I wear these almost every time I use the Vitamix. So the first thing I am going to do is drain my grains. I've got this fine mesh strainer in my sink, and I am just going to pour these grains in, and then now I'm going to rinse the bowl out and rinse off the grains. Buckwheat can be a little gelatinous, and that's okay. It's actually part of its beauty. So don't worry about that too much. It doesn't mean it's bad. And don't think you're never going to get it all off, so don't worry about it. But give it a good rinse, and then I just shake it out to let some of that water out. I had soaked this in filtered water, which I always do, and I always use tap water for rinsing. I just can't. It's just much easier that way. So now I will transfer my grains from the strainer to the Vitamix. Add my spring water. Put the lid on. Put it back on the blender. Drop my ear protection. Put that on. I'm just going to blend. Cover your ears. Okay, so now that should be nice and smooth. And just a quick Vitamix lesson. I always want to store it on variable. This is my Vitamix anyway. I have an older one. You might have a different model. But I always want to store it on variable and low, and I always start on variable and then crank it up to high. So I'm going to put my sourdough starter into my jar. So this is pretty thin. You can see it doesn't really matter, honestly, how thin it is. I probably could have gone with a 1/2 cup of water. I'll switch that in the recipe. But this is fine too. I'm actually not gonna, I'm gonna leave a little bit of it in there because if the jar is too full, it will overflow as it expands, so I don't want that. So now I'm gonna leave this on the counter. I'm gonna cover it up with a napkin. And I'm just gonna let it ferment for like however long it takes. I'm gonna expect it to take about 2 to 3 days. I will check back in with you and share my progress, and I will see you then.